opposition.
After 9 years, this Prime Minister, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister, is not worth the cost of mortgages, 76% of which will become more expensive over the next 3 years, according to the federal banking regulator, OSFI. This after the Prime Minister said rates would stay low for long. But we know that his massive government deficits have driven rates up 2 percentage points higher than they otherwise would be, according to Scotiabank. So will he accept my common sense dollar-for-dollar plan to cap spending and cut waste to bring down interest rates so Canadians keep their homes?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, when we put forward a plan to help first-time home buyers with 30-year mortgage amortizations, the Conservatives voted against it. The fact is, the only thing these Conservatives know how to do is cut, 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 and the only Canadians they care about are themselves.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, we have voted against everything this Prime Minister has done to balloon the cost of living of Canadians, to increase food bank use by 50% over 3 years, to send 1/4 of all young people to the food bank in 3 months alone, 1/4 of all Canadians skipping meals because they cannot afford a home, a 38% increase in homelessness since 2019. 50 new homeless encampments in Toronto, now a total of 256 of them in the biggest city in the country. Why is it that the more they spend, the more Canadians hurt?
Here, here, here. The Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the only thing they know how to do is cut, cut, cut. Tory times are hard times, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
We know how to cut taxes, Mr. Speaker, and that is why we reduced poverty and had affordable homes 9 years ago when common sense Conservatives were in government. Since that time, housing costs have doubled, mortgage payments have doubled, rent has doubled. The number of homeless encampments in Canada is up by hundreds of percent. We now have 1 in 4 Canadians skipping meals because they can't afford the cost of food. Will the government finally stop the policies that make Canadians poor, get off the backs of the working people, and let Canadians keep their homes?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we know what Conservatives do to programs that support the most vulnerable. Cut, cut, cut. We have put forward a national school food program, a dental care program, national early learning and child care. They want to cut those programs. We won't let them, Mr. Speaker.
On Thursday, we learned from an OSFI risk report that Canadian homeowners who renew their mortgages in 2026 will be facing a payment shock. What this means is that as of February 2024, 76% of Canadians are in jeopardy of losing their homes. After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, many Canadians are now facing the very real fact they will be losing their homes. These Liberals are just not worth the cost. Will the Liberals commit today to stopping their inflationary spending, to drive down interest rates, to make housing affordable, so that Canadians can keep their homes?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, as we have been making clear throughout question period, the only thing the Conservatives want to do is cut, cut, cut. Or let me quote the Parliamentary Budget Officer speaking last week in the other place. Canada compares rather favorably on a debt to GDP ratio when compared to G7 countries. We are probably the least or second least indebted country. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives are absolutely wrong about everything, including fiscal policy.
Very gently, I'd just like to ask the Honourable Member from Cumberland Colchester to please only take the floor when he is recognised to be doing. Sorry, did I say Cumberland Colchester? My Dufferin Caledon. My apologies. Now the Honourable honourable member from Northumberland, Peterborough South has the floor.
Well, in the next election, we'll let Canadians decide exactly who is wrong. And if you listen to these Liberals talk about this, you would think they never had it so good. The truth, it couldn't be any further. The fact is, we have tent cities from coast to coast. We have students who are living underneath bridges. We have workers who are living in their cars. You know what? If these Liberals won't listen to Canadians, if they won't listen to Conservatives, listen to your own regulators. Stop the spending, drive down costs, so Canadians can keep their homes.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there will of course be a next election, and at that moment in time, Canadians will be able to look at who has the record of stepping up and supporting vulnerable people. People have seen the game, they know what's up, and I don't think they're going to buy it.
Honourable member from Calgary, Forest Lawn.
After 9 years of this Liberal NDP Prime Minister, hunger and homelessness are up as 1 in 4 Canadians are food insecure. It's because this carbon tax scam leaves Canadians with less money in their pockets, food in their bellies, and fuel in their cars. This Prime Minister and this carbon tax scam are not worth the cost. Conservatives are calling for all federal fuel taxes to be axed this summer so Canadian families can save an average of $670. Will this road-raging finance minister stop the road trip wrecking and implement this common sense Conservative ask? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, but they're letting the country burn.
The honourable member from Calgary, Forest Lawn.
No doubt we will cut the carbon tax scam that will leave more money in Canadians' pockets. And she wants to talk about a food program. That food program has no food in it. The only thing these guys have been feeding over the last 9 years is the already obese government. What common sense Conservative governments are going to do is we're going to axe a tax for good. Why don't they just call a carbon tax election so we can show them how it's done anyways?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Parliamentary Budget Officer.
The Honourable Member from Halliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock.
Thank you, Speaker. I'll be sure and tell the people in my community that are suffering under this NDP Liberal government that a bunch of well-to-do economists and some tenured professors saying that life's never been so good. I'll make sure I tell them that. Speaker, common sense Conservatives have put forward this plan. We're asking the government to axe all federal taxes on gasoline from today until Labor Day, meaning that the average Ontarian could save about $600 this summer. When will the Prime Minister adopt our common sense plan, axe the carbon tax this summer so families can take their kids on vacation?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Make it all up. At the end of the day, 8 out of 10 just ignore the facts. Ignore the facts.
The minister seems to be getting ready for another university job after the election.
Their out-of-control spending and the carbon tax are driving Canadians into poverty. When will they cut the carbon tax and give Canadians a break?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Communities and Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, it is disingenuous in the extreme for the honourable colleague to argue that the very measures that put more money in the pockets of vulnerable people are driving the concerns that they are experiencing now.
The Honourable Member from Costa Bay, Central Notre Dame.
Mr. Speaker, this NDP Liberal government is receiving a failing grade in Newfoundland and Labrador. Back home, according to Food Banks Canada and its annual poverty report card, almost half are paying more than 30% of their earnings to house themselves. 40% are worried about feeding themselves. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the hunger and the homelessness. So will he listen to the premiers who begged him to axe the tax so that people can feed and house themselves?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, if my honourable colleague opposite...
The Honourable Member from Costa Bay, Central Notre Dame.
Mr. Speaker, I find that a bit rich coming from my colleague from Long Range Mountains who voted against Bill C-251, against the sealing industry, against the fishing industry, against the people in our very own riding, Madam Speaker, or Mr. Speaker. But you know what? Back to the matter at hand here. 45% back home have an inadequate standard of living. 35% have a severely inadequate standard of living. 26% are experiencing food insecurity. So after 9 years, while this NDP Liberal Prime Minister, who's not worth the hunger and not worth the homelessness, acts the tax and listen to the premiers of back home.
The Honourable Minister for Rural Economic Development and for Co-op.
Mr. Speaker, that's what we do, Mr. Speaker.
Newfoundland, Labrador.